Hello there guys, this is Dino Man here, and today we are going to be reviewing the 2015 CollectA Nasutoceratops. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up, its pose. This figure unfortunately suffers from the same thing that CollectA's ceratopsians had often struggled from, and they've only really kind of just begun to get their ceratopsians out of this, is it has a very stiff pose. I mean, I understand that it is just standing there, but I mean, they could have made it so that the legs were a little bit more bendy and weren't just so like straight and stiff. I mean, I don't know what it is about it. It seems almost a little bit unnatural. Even if they maybe just added in like a little bend in like this elbow so that maybe it was leaning down ever so slightly so it could bite a plant or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, it is fine. It really does kind of work for it. As a little flick at the end of the tail. The head is turned to the side. The pose really does work for the figure, I feel. And unlike in the other one, I feel like it's just not super noticeable, the stiffness of the legs, since it is just standing there and not really moving. One unfortunate thing to note about the pose is the head, the frill, as you can maybe see, does indeed fuse into the shoulder blade. Like, that part is one and the same. If they just maybe didn't make it quite so extreme, they could have prevented that. But I mean, it's fine, I guess, but it really does kind of look pretty weird because it really truly does just fuse into its shoulder blade, which does not look very natural at all. So overall, I give this figure a 7 out of 10 for the pose. The legs are kind of stiff, but the fact that it is just standing there really makes it so that they're not very noticeable. Next up, detail. Already we can see an improvement between this and the ceratopsian that CollectA had made prior, the Xenoceratops, because this one actually possesses very well defined, individually sculpted scales that run for most of the body. On the underside, it has more crocodilian-like scales like ceratopsians would have had. The underside of the feet have been sculpted, but they have not been sculpted with scales. They've instead been sculpted with these weird grooves. But the scales do cover most of the body, kind of are lacking more so on the face. But other than that, they really cover most of it. The beak and the horns of this figure are not weathered at all, which is unfortunate. But they have included the nice detail of how not all the quills on the back are straight and some of them are flopped over. But that being said, the detail is not superb on these at all either. You cannot really make out the individual quills, which is unfortunate. So overall, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 for the detail. It is moving forward, but it still is not really up to today's standards. And as you could see with the previous review, it wasn't even up to Safari Ltd standards at the time. Next up, the paint job. Now again, where this figure is lacking in some of the other sections, just like with their Xenoceratops, I feel it more than makes up for in its paint job. Starting from the back of the tail, it has these black stripes with this very, very light brown running all along the tail. Has a mostly gray body with these black legs and an almost white underside. And then when we get to the head, we get all this variety of black and this almost like a blue color, as well as the brown. It has like a brown chin running all along it. It has brown stripes all across it. It has a bright yellow beak, which is definitely very interesting to see. It has pure black eyes. And it has, of course, these eye spots on the top of the head. The eye spots on the top of the head really do remind me of the kind of eyes that you would see on like a moth or something like that, which really do look very, very nice. The horns are painted pure black. That is really it for most of the figure. It has some brown on the back of the neck as well. A lot more of an elaborate color scheme, and it really does look very nice on this figure. Also, its black eyes, like CollectA are pretty famous for just doing black eyes, do have this nice shine to them, and unlike on the Xenoceratops, it is basically just retained to the eyes, unlike the Xenoceratops, which is just more like the area around the eye that was painted. And just like the Xenoceratops, it does also possess brown hooves on its feet. Not quite as deep a dark brown as the Xenoceratops, but it is very nice to see since it's not the typical black or gray. So overall, I'm going to give this figure a 9 out of 10 for the paint job. It really truly is very nice. It's not the most standout paint job ever, but it looks very, very nice for what it is, and it remains very naturalistic. It's not bright and flamboyant. It's very believable that it could realistically exist as an animal and still be able to hide in the foliage and that stuff. Next up, paleontological accuracy. As I said in their Xenoceratops review, this does also possess quills on the back like CollectA have been doing for all of their ceratopsians. Whenever they started doing it, they've started doing it for all of them. The tail is nice and short. The hips on this figure seem to be really wide. Just like the whole body just seems to be kind of wide to me. I think it should be a bit skinnier. It does possess a cloaca right there. It's just it is not painted. It does seem to be located where it should be, but one of the things about it is this figure doesn't really seem to possess the ischium that would point out at all. It just seems to be concaved in that area, which is unfortunate. The head looks like that of a Nasutoceratops, like on the other one. The horns seem pretty accurate. The big nose, since this does mean big nose horn face, is also there. It really seems to be pretty good on accuracy on the head. Moving on to the feet, it possesses the 3 claws with the 2 smaller ones and 4 claws on the feet. The back feet seem to be pretty accurate, but the front feet still seem a little bit too elephantine. They really should be a bit more concaved inward, and it should really just be mostly on the tip of its toes. Really, what I'm trying to say here is its feet should look like the front feet of Safari Ltd Ceratopsians. Also, the scales don't seem super accurate either. For starters, they're not circles. They're kind of more random shapes. And second off, there needs to be bigger ones in with all the smaller ones. They weren't just all the same size. You can only really see it on this side because the other side is kind of fused into the body and all, but it does not possess an ear, so this figure is unfortunately deaf. Also, for accuracy, I have to say, good job, CollectA, on not shrink wrapping the head. You did unfortunately shrink wrap its shoulder blade though. I mean, that is just like really, really well defined on both sides. But other than that, that really seems to be it for the shrink wrapping, which is good to see. Anyone who collects or knows a lot about CollectA will know that CollectA really do struggle with shrink wrapping, which is very weird to me. That, because if anything, it's going to take more effort to shrink wrap your figure than to not shrink wrap it. So I don't really understand why they do it. Even to this day, they occasionally shrink wrap their figures, which is always unfortunate to see. Before I move on, the frill is also slightly shrink wrapped. The holes are defined in the frill, which they would not have been. They probably would have just fused in with the rest of the frill, kind of like how you see on the Safari one. Overall, I'm going to give this figure a 8 out of 10 for accuracy. Really hits a lot of the areas, but unfortunately it does fall short in some other areas. Now, before we move on to my overall score, let's do some size comparisons and see how big this figure is. So, for how big it is, it's not a terribly massive figure, but it's not small either. It's about 5 or so inches long, which is about 12 centimeters long, almost exactly. It is about 2 1/4 inches high, and it is about 5.5 centimeters high. For size comparisons, first up is the 2017 Safari Ltd Feathered Velociraptor, which is a fair deal bigger than this guy. Like said before, this figure is not a small figure, but it also is definitely by no means a big one. Here it is compared to the CollectA Ionosaurus. Next up is the other Nasutoceratops, the Safari Ltd Nasutoceratops, which basically corrects all of this one's inaccuracies. It has the correct feet, it has the correct frill. It really is an almost perfect representation of this creature. If you want to hear me go more in depth about this figure, then click the link that should be on the iCard right there. Now for this figure's overall score. Overall, I give this figure a 7.5 out of 10. It definitely is not the greatest creation that has ever been made, but it is still fairly decent. So that wraps up this review. The next review will be on the 2015 Papo Apatosaurus. I will see you all then. Dino Man,